Janice Lin. She is the managing partner of StrateGen Consulting and the co-founder and director of the California Energy Storage Alliance. Thanks, Rachel.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks to Rachel, Russ, and Don for inviting me here today. I think I've been to 4 out of 5 of the symposiums, and each year I always learn so much. This morning about all that giving at Microsoft. So Thea, I'm going to follow up with you on our new nonprofit, for sure. So what I'm here to do today, what Rachel asked me to do, is provide some context on the use cases and the benefits, basically the value proposition of customer-sited storage. But I'm a big fan of real-time presentation, so I have a few survey questions. Okay, how many of you, show of hands, this is your first energy storage conference? Wow, welcome. Okay, good. So I've got something for all you. How many of you would you say is your primary job function is managing or procuring or specifying energy projects at a large energy use customer, like a commercial or industrial facility? Show of hands. So a few. Folks, how many of you work in the industry? So like looking to sell, develop, or projects? Great. Oh, lots. Okay, how many of you have actually developed a storage project? Okay, this is a super, super advanced audience. And how many of you attended Joint Venture Silicon Valley's customer-sited storage workshop, which happened a year ago? 1 year ago. Okay, so a couple. Great, thank you. That's very, very helpful. Okay. Okay, so quick introduction about me. StrateGen Consulting is a strategic advisory firm. We specialize in consulting work, strategy consulting work, exclusively in clean energy. We've been doing work in energy storage since we were founded, since '05. One of the early activities, of course, in our storage strategy work was getting involved in the regulatory landscape. And what happened in '08 when we, interestingly, the birth of CESA was triggered by our work in the Self-Generation Incentive Program here in California. So right when the PUC decided to add storage to this customer buy-down program, they asked me and my regulatory attorney, Don, if we would start an alliance to represent all storage here in the grid here in California. And at the time, none existed. And so that's how CESA was started. And we started it in January of '09, and we're now up to about 80 or so member companies representing all forms of storage, a lot of renewable energy, fossil fuel developers, electrical contractors. It's a really great community. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what storage does on the grid in general, and then we're going to drill down and focus on the application of customer-sited storage and why it's so exciting. And we're going to go in a little more detail on what some of the benefit streams are. So generally, and this is what we're trying to do with CESA, is like we really believe in having an affordable grid. And the goal is to utilize the system assets we have more efficiently. And what you're looking at here, I guess this thing is a pointer. This is a plot of the energy use in California from CAISO for an entire year. And as you can see, it's not very smooth. We have a little bump in the summertime, a lot of air conditioning load. And the idea is that, you know, during peak times, storage can help us clip those peaks and move energy from our generation capacity to times when we need it more. Oops. Yeah. So the idea is, here in California, sorry, I skipped ahead too. Our average utilization of this entire system, generating plants, transmission, distribution lines, we're talking about a lot of capital tied up in this system. We only use it about half the time. So that's what I call a low-hanging fruit. If we can use this really expensive infrastructure more efficiently, that will save all of us and all ratepayers a lot of money. So that's what we're going to do with storage. Okay, who here has seen this duct chart already? Okay, great. So I don't have to explain it, but clearly when you look at a new net load curve, and there's a whole flock of ducks for California. I mean, this is an arbitrary peak day in March that the CESA modeled, but the idea is that our load shape is changing, and we're getting the potential for overgeneration in the middle of the day and a very steep ramp, which constitutes the duck's neck, and this is creating some challenges for our system operator. So there's a lot of talk in California about the need for flexible capacity. So how can storage help with this issue? And generally what this shows is this is 2 hypothetical days. What storage can do is it can charge during those troughs and discharge during the peaks, effectively shrinking the height of the ramp. So that reduces the need for flexible. It provides flexible capacity and reduces the need for flexible capacity by charging up during the trough. The other thing to remember is this net load, our second to second is not a smooth line. It's fluctuating all the time. So that's another key use of storage, is to provide super fast response to smooth out that line, providing regulation, for example. And finally, we can't leave out, Don mentioned electric vehicles. I love this chart. This is a little dated. I bet the bar is even bigger today, thanks to companies like Tesla. But energy storage is really helpful for assisting with vehicle-to-grid integration. I mean, clearly there's a lot of storage capacity on the vehicle itself, but one sub-application of customer-sited storage is to help mitigate demand charge peaks when that Tesla rolls in and wants that quick charge. That can be a little difficult sometimes for the distribution utility to manage it. And what I love about this chart is these are EVs sold by state in 2011, and California certainly stands out. So when we talk about energy storage, from a CESA standpoint and from a market development standpoint, we usually talk about all forms of storage, everything from electrochemical to mechanical, bulk mechanical, thermal storage, and certainly storage used in transportation. So when I'm out there giving talks, I always speak about portfolio. There's all kinds of storage that's needed, and there's a role for it on the grid. The grid is a very, very big place with a lot of needs. Globally, there's about 145 gigawatts installed. Approximately less than 3% of that is non-pumped hydro, but that percentage share is growing. If you'd like more information about installed projects, I encourage you to check out the DOE's Global Energy Storage Database, and the URL is there. You can sort it any way you like. The other key thing about storage in this whole diverse asset class is you can put it anywhere on the grid. So it can be, and this is a chart courtesy of EPRI, it can be sited at the transmission level, distribution level, and also on the customer side. And what I find particularly exciting is that, especially for small distributed applications, storage can go places where traditional fossil fuel plants cannot. This is a snapshot of an actual project being developed in San Francisco by a new developer called PowerTree Energy Services. And each one of these, their little solar panels on those batteries, is representative of a site. I think there's 68 sites in total that are located at multifamily or affordable housing units. And each location combines stationary storage with rooftop solar, high power EV charging. And what's super cool is this is a great example of the power of storage to provide many benefit streams. So that stationary storage, I think they're under 50 kW each. They're aggregated and are going to provide frequency regulation services to CESA in the day-ahead market. They're providing peak load reduction, charging up any excess solar, and also providing extended emergency backup services in the event of a grid outage for elevators and lighting. Oh, and the other important thing about this slide, so this is, it's a 3 megawatt project, so that's contributing to peak supply. The nearest power plant is 20 miles away. Can't put a power plant in downtown San Francisco. This slide shows the difference when we talk about benefit streams and how storage can provide multiple benefit streams from one asset. And these are the results of a modeling effort that looked at storage and how it can provide services as compared to, say, a gas peaker. So on the left, this shows the annual hourly asset utilization of a storage system used in this sort of what we call our bulk peaking application. And the little gray bar on the right, the 4.2% of the time, that was the utilization of the combustion turbine. And what's happening in that 99.7% of the time, this storage device is providing many valuable resources: energy, spinning reserves, up, down regulation. And it is for this reason that the preliminary cost effectiveness work that was performed by the Public Utilities Commission, and if you want to learn more about that, you can talk to Alok over here. Alok, raise your hand. And this chart, what it's showing is the results of the different scenarios run comparing storage to a bulk peaker. I think the peaker came in at a benefit to cost ratio of 0.85. So the red line is a benefit to cost ratio of 1, and the blue line show all the various scenarios looked at for storage, and many of them were cost effective when these multiple benefit streams were appropriately valued and considered. And this finding was kind of astounding, I think, in a real breakthrough for all the stakeholders involved in the storage proceeding. This storage, how many people have heard about AB 2514? Is this something that most folks have heard about? Okay, so just for the few of you who haven't raised your hand, this is legislation that was sponsored by Jerry Brown. At the time, he was Attorney General, he became our governor, and it was the first piece of legislation that we're aware of anywhere that specifically focused on promoting energy storage in the electric power system. And what this legislation did, it required the commission to open a proceeding to study energy storage, and that's where all that great work was done on cost effectiveness, coming up with applications. And the result of this work was a ruling by the Public Utilities Commission requiring load-serving entities, and in particular the investor-owned utilities, to procure 1.325 gigawatts by 2020 and have that fully installed by 2024. The framework is really brilliant in that it sets forth biannual targets leading up to 2020, and there's a transmission, distribution, and customer target. And notably, the customer-cited target is one that I wanted to draw your attention to because it calls for 200 megawatts. You have to add it up. It's the 30 plus the 85 plus the 85, 200 megawatts by 2020. And so even though customers here in California, you know, the different companies may install storage, that would still count towards the utilities requirement. So there is going to be a lot of storage developed either through the SCHIP or otherwise. So that's sort of big picture context, and I wanted to switch gears and talk more specifically about these applications and the value proposition that Don did such a fabulous job setting up. And we call this application, there's actually many applications on the customer side, but for the purposes of today, we're going to look at the application from the perspective of an end user. And we call that commercial bill management. It makes sense for commercial users because of the tariff structure here in California. Generally, you need a tariff that has a demand charge and a differential between peak and off-peak energy. So basically what you're doing is you're charging during times when energy is less expensive, discharging during times when it's more expensive, but most importantly trying to avoid those pesky demand charges, which here in California can represent as much as 40% of your electric bill. In addition to that demand charge capture, there are other benefit streams. Some are unique to California, some are not. One is that is unique to California is our self-generation incentive program. This is a program that was started in the height of the energy crisis in about 2001. It provided incentives to distributed solar and a whole host of generation technologies. We were successful in intervening and making sure that storage is now statutorily eligible in this program. Sadly, the program's budget sunsets at the end of this year. The good news is there is new legislation proposed to reauthorize this program, so likelihood is very high. Actually, there is not one, not two, but 3 bills proposed to reauthorize this program anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And one of those 3 bills actually is from Governor Brown himself in his May revise. He has a trailer bill that just got launched last week, and that is for a 5-year straight extension, which is super exciting. That can be a significant chunk of financeable upfront cash, bankable upfront cash, because it's paid, most of it's paid in a lump, and then there's a performance payment. Another interesting and valuable revenue stream that wasn't addressed earlier is the ability to participate in CESAs, ancillary services markets, for frequency regulation. And some recent rules that were spearheaded by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, actually have created a tariff that pays more for this service if you are faster and if you're quicker and can respond more quickly, say, than the traditional resource, which is a gas peaker. So what would happen is, like, how do you do all that from one asset? Basically, during times that you're shifting, you can't be providing frequency regulation, but when you're charging or in the periods where you're not using the battery, remember the day is long, you can provide frequency regulation services. And then, of course, if the grid goes out, you can provide emergency backup. That's similar to what I described earlier with the Power Tree project. Okay, so what do the numbers look like? And these are slides that we presented at Joint Venture SEEDZ workshop about a year ago. But nothing better than to look at an actual case study. And here is a typical commercial customer. We took a sample load profile of a high school, so it's very peaky. Peak demand during the day, not a lot of demand at night, not a lot on the weekends. And this is a hypothetical 100 kilowatt, 2-hour storage system. The situation we modeled was in a turnkey equity purchase, and assuming a capital expenditure of storage of a little less than $1,000 a kilowatt hour and a round trip efficiency of 85%. And with no incentives, the internal rate of return, let's see, I think this was on, it's an Edison tariff, a TOU8 tariff from Southern California Edison. It was an 8.2% internal rate of return. Not bad. But there are no incentives here at all. No federal tax credit, no state tax credit. If you add in the self-generation incentive program, and the SGIP incentives used to be $2 a watt. Over time, they've scaled back. So in 2014, it's now at $1.62. That internal rate of return goes up to 12.4%. Much more interesting. So what's going on here? Basically, the load was this blue line, and we're using storage to charge in the evening. It's kind of hard to point, and displace that empty pocket at the peak. And where you can see that most of the savings is really in the demand charges, less so in the energy charges. In fact, you're going to suffer an increased energy charge to take into account your round trip efficiency losses. But as you can see, the demand charge far outweighs that extra cost. You could think of that as a fuel cost. What's interesting is if you fold in some solar, and this is a very simplistic example. I think we assumed a 10% reduction in CapEx on the storage just by being able to integrate the two and install them at the same time. So there's no other benefits than that. In the case of the base case where there's no SGIP, the internal rate of return went up from 8% to about 13%. And this is just on the storage. So we've pulled out all the economics of the solar system. We just changed the cost structure. And if you add in the SGIP, we went from a 12.4% IRR to a 17.7%. So what this shows is there's real synergy in integrating storage with another DG technology like solar. And depending on how you charge, the rate of return can be even better. It is an optimization, but there's rules based on existing tax policy. You can count the investment tax credit toward the storage if most of the energy that goes into the storage device comes from the eligible solar technology, for example. But that was not included here. And then finally, we have this other scenario, which we call commercial bill management plus. And this is in the case where you're doing the demand charge capture, and during the times when you're not using the storage system for that purpose, you can use the storage system to provide services and sell services into the CESA market. Now that's dependent on the price, and that's going to change. It's a day-ahead market. But then we see a big jump in the internal rate of return. I think the base case of storage with the SGIP was 12.4%. You add in frequency regulation revenue and you bump it up to 21.6%. So this is getting more and more attractive once you start layering in the different benefit streams. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we ran a bunch of scenarios, and for this particular customer, this anonymized customer, the savings start stacking up and represent a significant portion of their annual electricity cost savings. So I think this is why the 10 plus customers at JV SEEDZ were so interested, and you'll hear from other developers later today. I wanted to show you a couple of pictures. This is Gill's Onions. This was a flow battery project in Oxnard, California. And for those of you who are developing storage projects like Greensmith and Green Charge, I need new pictures. These are outdated because there's a lot more projects that are out there now. This is, I think a couple years ago, we had Matt Muniz from Alameda County come and present on the Santa Rita Jail. So this is the case of how storage is used in a local microgrid. Similar value proposition. I don't believe they're performing frequency regulation, but here the storage is integrated with an on-site fuel cell, on-site wind, and on-site solar. And the storage really enables them to seamlessly island much of the campus, I think the whole campus, without having to fire up their diesel generator. How do you know when you're a good value prop for customer-sited storage? You got a really big demand charge and a peaky load, and you're in an IOU service territory, so you're eligible for the SGIP. Those are the primary ones. Finally, if you'd like to learn more, we have an event in September. We partner with joint venture Silicon Valley. Our event was held in San Jose Convention Center, and we're doing it at the San Jose Convention Center again this year, September 30th through October 2nd. We will cover many more applications of storage, not just customer-sited, but also mobility. We have an entire track just focused on how to use storage innovatively to accelerate the deployment of EVs. And we also cover, of course, utility scale applications, and it's all of North America. And I think that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. I'll take questions. Question over here.
Would you mind sharing the spreadsheet that underlies the math on the project math you did? Because it would be really interesting to see how you guys are approaching that detail.
We can. In fact, I didn't include it here, but we actually have the performa in the workshop presentation. So I don't know if you're sharing this, Rachel, but I can stick that in there as an extra slide before she disseminates it. Okay, any other questions? I don't know if there's time for maybe one or two more. Okay, Ed.
So much of what the benefits of storage are around managing demand charges, but if people get good at demand charges, they'll have to change. What is the long-term evolution of that?
Well, if anything, our demand charges have gone up here in California, not down. There are, as you know, tariff structure changes all the time. So that's been, quite frankly, one of the concerns of investors for customer-sited storage is so much of the value proposition is dependent on a structure that can change every few years. And that's why the SGIP has been so instrumental, I think, to some of these early projects. There are literally hundreds of applications in the SGIP program for storage. There's more applications for storage than any other technology. They tend to be smaller projects. And the reason that's helped is the SGIP is bankable and it's an upfront cash flow. So that is a risk that we have to contend with. I think that there's the prospect for potentially someday in the near future securing long-term contracts with utilities for behind-the-meter assets. In fact, just last week, Southern California Edison issued an RFI, request for information, for how non-generation or storage assets can be used to provide capacity to support the distribution network. And that's kind of a big deal because it's a reliability application, and utilities have historically always been of the mine that such applications, if it's reliability, we got to own it. It has to be in the rate base. And it's certainly not going to be on the customer side of the meter. So this was pretty innovative, and that just, I think it's an outgrowth of some of the other procurement requirements here in California that to meet our long-term procurement planning needs for California, that they consider not only traditional sources of procurement, but also preferred resources. So distributed generation, there was a storage requirement put on Southern California Edison, big utilities, they have to buy a minimum of 50 megawatts. So I think there's very good prospects going forward for finding ways to do long-term contracts with utilities for that unused capacity of the behind-the-meter storage that will help bridge and alleviate that risk. Okay. One last question.
We've seen a lot of change in the pricing for PV. What's your prediction for the pricing, future pricing for storage?
Well, I think that would be a good question, best deferred to our keynote speaker today. Generally, it's a tough question because storage is an asset class. And pumped hydro, for example, I'm not sure if there's too much downward price pressure on pumped hydro. It's been around, it's a very mature technology solution. Some of the newer emerging applications probably have a steep price reduction ahead of them. So it really varies by the technology. Of the lithium ion is one class that does have public projections. I believe NITO, the Japanese New Energy, I can't remember what NITO stands for, and DOE have published forecasts, and those, in fact, I think I had a slide in here on that. Let me see. Oh, there it is. So on the left, this is the upfront cost per kW of PV, single axis PV. And that's the curve coming down on the left. This is a conventional simple cycle combustion turbine, and as you can see, those costs are going up. And what we're trying to say is like, hey, renewable energy is coming down and there's no fuel cost. And on the right is the NITO DOE, which I think were very similar, their lithium ion cost projection. And I think they're saying, and this is at the cell level, so something like $350, $400 by 2015 and 200 and some change by 2020. I'd be really curious to hear what JB has to say about that. And this was data that we got from NITO and DOE. But this is just one technology example. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I'll be here the whole day if anybody has more questions.